and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I'm going to get into a topic that a lot of us in the kink community talk about, and it's usually quite exciting and sometimes a little bit daunting and challenging. Today I'm going to talk about introducing our vanilla partners to kink. Now, this conversation's a little bit more than just about sharing our interests or our fantasies. It's really about creating a space where we both can kind of come together, feel understood, feel heard. And for those of us who are really deeply involved in the kink world, it might be second nature to explore various dynamics and practices. But when we're talking to someone who's unfamiliar with these experiences, and this introduction can be really complex and sometimes can be overwhelming or even sensitive. Now, understanding how to approach this is going to be really crucial. It's not just about presenting your interests, giving them a whip, and telling them to beat you or allowing you to beat them, but it's about navigating some new territory here in a way that respects and acknowledges how they feel, their comfort levels, and maybe their boundaries. And the goal here is to foster a dialogue that allows both of you to express how you feel and what your desires are in an open way without feeling pressured or even overwhelmed. Today, I'm going to really go through some practical strategies for starting these conversations, how to gauge your partner's reaction, how to introduce kink in a safe way that allows that to feel natural and maybe even enjoyable. I'm also going to talk about maybe some of their reactions and even cover what vanilla means to those of us who may never have come across this terminology before. So I really want to start here first by understanding your vanilla partner's perspective and what they might be thinking and how their feelings and how they're going to encounter the world of kink for the first time, and maybe taking us back to how we felt and how to approach these initial conversations with a little bit of sensitivity and empathy for them. So let's get into this here. Let's really understand our partners here. Now, in the context of kink, when we call someone vanilla, it does refer to an individual who typically doesn't engage in anything outside of traditional or conventional forms of intimacy or even sexual practices. They may not be overly familiar or even interested in exploring anything kinky. It is important to understand that vanilla just is a term used to describe a particular set of preferences rather than some sort of negative judgment. There's nothing wrong if you just like vanilla and you're into vanilla things. It's fine. There's no condemnation here. Now, for many, vanilla represents a default or mainstream approach to intimacy, which can include practices and expressions that are more widely accepted and understood within conventional frameworks. This could range from romantic gestures to the standard sexual activities that don't really involve any elements of kink, right? When we talk about vanilla sex, the majority of the time it pops in our mind, it's just kind of like missionary or with just somebody on top, or a standard date and maybe just hand holding. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's quite traditional and it's normalized, but these are some of the images that get conjured up with this. Now, if we are recognizing this distinction, it becomes crucial for a few reasons. First, we have some differences in backgrounds. Vanilla partners may come from different backgrounds where kink's not really a topic of discussion or exploration, and these experiences and comfort levels are shaped by what they've been exposed to in their life and maybe what even aligns with their personal values. And there's then the non-negative context. Viewing somebody as vanilla is simply another preference rather than a negative label. It helps avoid making assumptions or even judgments. It allows us to be a little bit maybe even more proactive and respectful when we're having some of our interests discussed. And respectful communication, which is another thing that we are supposed to be doing in the lifestyle, that we understand here that vanilla preferences aren't indicative of a partner's lack of interest in the relationship or that there's somehow a personal inadequacy that requires more open and forceful dialogue. It really tells us, hey, maybe they haven't experienced a whole lot and we're shedding a new world to them. But no matter what, it helps us approach these conversations with sensitivity and allows the acknowledgement of different interests that doesn't diminish the value of the relationship itself. And the foundational understanding here sets the stage for conversations to come and how they can be empathetic and considerate. So, what are some of the common concerns here? Well, when you introduce someone to kink who identifies maybe in the vanilla range, several concerns might arise. First, there's going to be a fear of the unknown. Kink really is new and is unfamiliar territory, and especially for someone vanilla, it's probably going to conjure a lot of images of whips and chains and beating people. And I mean, that's some of the things I thought of when I first heard of BDSM. And this could lead to a little bit of apprehension or even anxiety for someone, right? They may not understand how they're going to fit in that framework of the things that we're interested in. They might have some misconceptions, like I was saying before. They might think about stereotypes or that kink has unsafe practices or that somehow we're getting involved with it because we're not satisfied or dissatisfied with the relationship that we're currently in. And maybe they even have concern about the dynamics of the relationship. They're wondering if it's going to shift some sort of balance or that it could lead to changes in intimacies or even expectations of what that they're not comfortable with. We have to approach these things with a little bit of empathy when we're talking to someone who isn't a part of this world, but we're slowly introducing them to it. We have to acknowledge their feelings and fear. We chose to be with them. If we're making a conscious choice to date somebody not in this life, then we have to make a conscious choice to understand they may not want to be a part of it. You can't date somebody and then expect to change them because that's what you want. Then you're being selfish and you're self-sabotaging your own relationship. If they're not open to it after you have the discussion, then you deal with that and move on. Which then leads me to this part. How do we handle that rejection? Now, we have to understand that a vanilla partner might reject the idea of exploring kink altogether. And that's going to be a little bit challenging. Because you're going to have to be respectful and understanding, especially if your partner's not interested in kink at all. You have to respect what they're saying. And their rejection here isn't necessarily a judgment of you or your interests. It's just personal preference, right? You have to be willing to maintain open communication. If you focus on expressing your feelings without pressuring them, it's going to allow you to discuss desires and how you can make them fit maybe into your relationship within a negotiated context, right? You can't just trick somebody into doing something that you want. They're not going to enjoy that. And then you're going to have to evaluate the relationship dynamics here. If your partner rejects kink, it's not even open to something like polyamory or alternate arrangements, that's going to present a really big problem. And you're going to have to reflect on what both of you value in the relationship. If you're really interested in kink and your partner isn't, this is going to be now about weighing the importance and the aspect of their life against the overall health and happiness of the relationship. It's going to be a whole personal fulfillment versus relationship harmony. It's something sometimes I ask clients when I'm working with them, if you've met somebody outside of the BDSM world, can you do it? Can you give that part of yourself up, or is it too much ingrained into you? Because you can't make somebody into something they're not just to fulfill your needs. We're not playing with a doll. This isn't that. So you can't do these things. And you're going to have to figure out maybe what the common ground is here. And if the relationship can survive and how you can maybe negotiate and go from there. There's got to be a lot of compromising. But handling rejection involves that combination of empathy and patience and self-reflection. We learn rejection resiliency inside of BDSM. So if we have a partner who then rejects the idea of BDSM altogether, that's fine. Then we have to learn how we're going to navigate around that, or whether or not we're going to stay inside of it. But no matter what we're doing, talking, communicating with our partner is going to be, again, as always, a big key. And it's going to be always a key in any relationships. But when you're talking about introducing someone to kink, talking to them is going to be your best ally. It's going to be the best way to move forward. Because you're talking about laying the groundwork for some potential exploration moving forward. Not necessarily getting a chance to explore, but the potentiality of it. So you have to give them a space where they're going to feel relaxed and not pressured. You want to start with an open tone. You want to make your partner feel comfortable, so when you share your thoughts, it doesn't scare them away. Right? You need to be clear in what your desires are and how you're expressing them. You need to be upfront about why you're interested in it and what about the lifestyle interests you. It's not about demanding anything, but it's sharing what excites you inside of the lifestyle with them. Maybe you can even encourage a little bit of reciprocity. Invite them to share their feelings. Make it a two-way conversation where both of you can express any concerns and any curiosities that you have. This not only shows that you value their perspective, but it helps you understand them, which then allows you both to understand each other better. And no matter what you do here, this is a non-pressure approach. You can't discuss these things and put any pressure on your partner. You've got to reassure them, their comfort. All these things are your priority. And you got to let them know that you're starting this conversation because it matters to you. But there's no rush or obligation on their part. Right? No matter what, though, when you're doing this, you need to set some boundaries. You guys got to have some parameters when you're talking about this. So once you start this conversation, you want to set some clear comfort levels. This allows both of you to feel secure and respected if you decide to have this conversation and then move forward. So you got to discuss your boundaries. It's, you want to talk about what you're both and are comfortable and not comfortable with. We're not just talking about limitations here, but things about maybe you even want to discuss. Maybe you're not even discussing, your partner's not comfortable with discussing being beaten. They feel there's some things around that they can't wrap their head around. That's fine. You don't talk about it. You got to respect that on their side. You got to establish some signals here. If we're not just talking about safe words and in the respect that if we're starting these conversations that we're calling red, but in essence, you got to understand that setting up these things is essential. Because if this at least allows your partner a cue to use the stop or the pause button, if they're not feeling right talking about this, or if it's getting overwhelming for them, because you're going to have to remember your first time. My first time in the kink scene, in a formal kink scene, it was overwhelming. So as you're having these conversations with them, it's fine. Just let them find a pace they're comfortable with. Because remember, at this point, you're already going to have a lot more information than they do, and you're hitting them with a bunch of new stuff, right? You got to keep the respect going each ways. It's not just about their emotional, their emotional comfort, but their psychological comfort. You got to make sure that what you've told them over the last couple of days or weeks, that they're okay with it. Then you're going to set a time, if they're ever curious, to negotiate on what they feel and negotiate if they even want to move forward. Just like if we're actually in a dynamic, because you're changing the parameters of your current relationship and you're trying to introduce something new, it's okay, but you're going to have to remember all these things. If we do these things inside of our relationships, there's a lot we can borrow from BDSM to bring into vanilla relationships, but you really are going to have to do this pace a lot slower when you're introducing somebody vanilla to the lifestyle for them to understand the potentiality here of what you're really wanting and you're hoping to bring them into. And so how would we do this? Is it going to be a rapid introduction? No, it's got to be gradual. Because you're going to have a lot of sensitivity and a lot of patience. And a gradual approach can make this transition for you smoother and more enjoyable for the two of you. Because you're not actually asking them to do it. You're actually asking them to do it for you, ultimately, when you're introducing them to it, if they've never been into it before. And that's fine. You want to get them into it. But then you're going to have to go at their pace. Right? You're going to have to start small. And the idea behind starting small is to ease them into kink without overwhelming somebody, right? This allows you to build comfort and curiosity without putting too much pressure on them to perform at some sort of level. Maybe you want to start with something light and easy, like a role play. And that can be, a little bit fun, and it can be low pressure, and it gets them into a really nice introductory phase of kink because it's non-threatening. And that way they can build up their confidence a little bit more. Maybe you want to introduce them to some kink-themed media, right? And you can look at books, movies, documentaries, right? Any of these things that you can suggest and you can do together, it serves not just as being educational, but a conversation starter. Hey, I came across this movie that explored different aspects of kink in a really interesting way. Maybe you're talking about The Secretary. I prefer The Secretary. I know people have other movies they like, but I prefer The Secretary over 50 Shades of Stupid because that's not real. But at least, hey, what do you think? And they might, watch it for 5 minutes and not be identifying in the masochist range, be completely turned off. But that's fine. You started. You made some sort of attempt. Right? But no matter what here, this method allows your partner to engage with kink from a distance. And it gives them time to process and reflect how they feel and what they're thinking about, especially when it comes into the terms of getting involved. But no matter what, it allows some more discussion to happen. You can give them some educational resources. Talk to them about upcoming classes. Maybe, if they're interested in rope or their spankings, or they want to learn more about, there's consent work class or relationship class coming up, or the dynamics, but what do power dynamics mean? All these things. You can do something with them. You can take them to a munch, perhaps, right? Let them talk to people so they can maybe find some people that can give them insight of where their journeys began, and it helps normalize it a little bit more for them. Online forums, maybe Discord servers, Reddit potentially, FetLife, sure. I don't put too much face in like fetish.com or fetlife.com, not because I don't like those places, but I'm careful to call that place a community. It is a platform we can connect to communities, but it's not a community in itself. Right? But doing these gradual introductions for our partner really does help soften the blow to some extent. But how do we manage the expectations and reactions we're going to receive? Well, we're going to have to be understanding when we do introduce somebody to kink, it can evoke a variety of reactions. And we have to learn how to manage them effectively. And that way, when we learn this, it allows us to handle up the whole positive and negative things thoughtfully and keep a conversation going in the right direction. So how do we handle their reactions? Well, when our new partner that we are, really like and care about, we want to introduce them to this world, when they experience it for the first time, their reactions are going to be probably quite across the board. They might be disgusted. They might be excited and start stripping off their clothes and beat me, daddy, right? Who knows? But no matter what their responses are, you're going to have to be a little bit sensitive when it comes to it. Now, especially if they're positive here, that's a great and an encouraging sign. They might be enthusiastic or curious or eager, and you might have to actually slow them down more so than yourself. But it gives you an opportunity to build together and celebrate this positive response by a continued exploration and talking about what excites you both. But even with enthusiasm, ensure that the pace remains comfortable for the two of you, because you don't want somebody all of a sudden, you're like, hell yeah, I'm into this, boom, and they're gone like a rocket ship. Next weekend they've got you signed up for 15 classes and they're going to a dungeon party and they contacted a pro and they're going to be, this, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, that's really overwhelming, right? So that's probably not going to be, that's probably be a little bit much, but at least the enthusiasm is there. And you want to make sure you're regularly checking in with each other, so you keep that level of excitement and neither one of you feels overwhelmed or outpaced. But how do we deal with the negative or the hesitant ones? Well, if your partner's a little bit more hesitant or negative, it's important to make sure you come at that with a lot of empathy and patience. Maybe they have concerns or reservations based on their own personal boundaries or their unfamiliarity with kink itself. So you need to acknowledge how they feel and validate them. You can't do this with judgment, or you can't be nagging them, but you got to allow them to give them the area and openness to express their thoughts and how they're feeling. You have to listen to them actively. You can't push people away and start pushing them into activities they're going to be uncomfortable with. You have to reassure them. You have to tell them their feelings are valid and that you're open to taking things at a pace that's comfortable for the both of you. Right? It's not a one-way bike path. It's a two-way street. So how do we start getting back into the point where we revisit some of these conversations? Well, as all relationships progress, we have to think about how essential it is to revisit certain conversations or discussions about kink. And if our comfort levels change over time and the ongoing communication helps with both of us, then we do things like continuous check-ins. And we need to check in with them about their feelings towards kink, towards us, and how engaged they are. These conversations really do give us the opportunity to address anything new that's coming up, whether it's a concern or an interest that's, on the periphery for us at the very least. And you got to be able to have that pace and that spot where they can come to you. If you've introduced somebody who's never been in kink before, you got to understand they're going to feel overwhelmed. So you need to be that open conduit. So if they've got a question, they need to be able to come to you. And if you don't have the answer, that's okay. You can explore the answer together. And that leads me to this part. You got to adapt to changes. And you got to be prepared for changes in somebody's comfort levels or their interests as your relationship continues to grow. Now, what was the initial uncomfortable or unappealing before might be more accepting over time, and new interests could emerge. And you're going to have to adapt your approach based on these things, ensuring that both of you are heard, that your needs are met, and your desires are addressed. But that's all about maintaining that positive and respectful dynamic, and we just got to be patient with somebody who's new. We can't expect them to be at our pace if we've been doing it longer, and then we're just now bringing them to this world. We have to go to a pace that's healthy for them as well. Sometimes we're going to have to even consider slowing ourselves down. My final thoughts on this is that I really do want to emphasize that this process is as much about understanding and patience as it is about exploration. Navigating this involves a lot of communication, a whole ton of empathy, and a lot of willingness to adapt and grow together. If you remember that integrating kink into a relationship isn't a race or a one-size-fits-all experience. It's a process that requires a lot of time, a lot of understanding, a lot of talking, a lot of open dialogue, a lot of validation. And both of you are going to need to feel comfortable and heard. And the key to this is going to be that in each step has a little bit of care and a little bit of understanding along the way. If you're finding this process at all challenging, you're not alone. Many people face similar hurdles and find ways to navigate them successfully. But you have to be willing to keep the lines of communication open. You have to be respectful of each other's boundaries, and you got to be patient, right? You can't expect somebody to start at your pace if they're brand new. Encouragement goes a long way. Whether you're just starting this conversation or you're deep into the journey, every step you take is got to have a little bit of empathy and a lot of respect. And each time you do that, that's a positive step forward in the right direction. Trust is a process. Support each other and allow the relationship to evolve naturally. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are. Have you ever been introduced somebody who is vanilla to the kink world? I mean, at one point we were all vanilla, right? Because we didn't know I do scoff at the notion a little bit that we're born kinky. You can't know, you can understand, maybe that pain does have something, but for the most part, growing up in our teen years, maybe even our first couple of relationships, we don't really understand it's there. We know we're different, but, or like something different, but yeah, that's just my personal opinion on it. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. Have you ever introduced a partner? Maybe what was your first introduction to kink and how did that look? Be interesting to hear. If this is the first time you're listening to me, first I know there are some new people out there. I want to say thank you to some people. There's a lot of new countries, so I'm not going to be able to get to you all here, but I do want to say thank you for listening. And the questions that you're sending to me are fantastic, and you're helping me create and think about future shows. I have spoken about this on social media recently, but I am looking into some new shows of what does BDSM look like in the Middle East. This show today and quite a few others. I have a conversation coming up here that I'm trying to do with two wonderful women I know on women, kink, and politics and how that looks and intersects for a lot of different, people and their take on that. So if you are following me, I do ask you, if you're on Spotify, go to your app, click on the three little, buttons, click the thing and rate my show. I'm asking you to rate it. If you like the show, click it for 5 stars. If this is the first time, follow along, hit the follow button. This allows me to let the show keep growing, find others, help others, and keep the show for free. If you'd like to donate to my work here, I'd appreciate it. I've already had a few, and it's wonderful because it allows me to keep doing what I'm doing. I've been doing this for 2.5 years. Doing it pretty much for free for all that time. I try to keep the show ad-free. So if you'd like to donate and keep the show ad-free, I'd appreciate it. No donation is too big or too small. There is a donation link in the profile description. You can go there and do that. Great. If you're on Apple and you can rate the show, I'd appreciate it. I don't know necessarily what the process is on Apple, but you know what? Rate the show 5 stars. Keep it getting out there for me. Allow others to find the show. I do have a book out. It's called Tangled Desires, the intersection between BDSM and psychology. You can find that wherever you get your books or in your ebooks. And subsequently, if you are looking for a therapist that is understandable, knowledgeable about the lifestyle, if you're dealing with trauma, other intersections or something, problems in relationships, I know I'm kind of going through that really fast, but you can find me, you can get a hold of me through my website. That's also in the description below. Take a look. And you know what? If you need some help, I'm here to listen. Worst case scenario, send me a question. If you'd like me to cover a topic on the show, or you'd maybe even like to be on it, you've got something interesting to talk about, throw me a message. Email me at the Kink Perspective, right? The Kink Perspective at gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter, at Kink Perspective, or on Instagram at the Kink Perspective, right? Let me know. I'd like to hear more about your thoughts about the introductions of vanilla partners into BDSM, where maybe your first story about being vanilla and getting introduced to BDSM and what that was like and what your journey was. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay kinky.